Dear Minister and conference attendee, we have a pressing matter to discuss here today. The conference addresses the fact that plastic waste originates in our societies. Plastic waste is an increasing problem in the marine environment, and we need to do something about it. The aim is to give an overview of existing knowledge on the issue of plastic in the marine environment and to identify reasonable and effective measures to minimize plastic waste in the marine environment. In order to be able to collect and present a variety of possible solutions, the organizers want to bring together all the relevant actors from both public and private sectors. I'm really enthusiastic to see such a big audience here today from so many different actors in society. And I thank you for taking part in bringing forward the solution on how to minimize and hopefully clear plastic waste from our marine environment. Iceland holds the chairmanship in the Nordic Council of Ministers in 2014, and this conference is a part of Iceland's chairmanship program and co-funded by the Nordic Council of Ministers. I would like to point to you that the conference is being video recorded, and we will post it on our webpage and Facebook site in coming days. We will start the conference with a welcome address for the Minister from the Environment and Natural Resources, who I like to add is also a Minister for Fisheries, Sigurður Ingi Jóhannsson. Welcome.
Thank you, Kristi-Linda. Dear guests, welcome to this conference on plastic waste in the ocean. Lengi tekur sjórinn við is a saying in the Icelandic that indicates that the custom of throwing waste in the ocean is a way to get rid of it. Today we know better, and we do not get rid of things that we throw into the ocean. They may even return to us and end on our own dish with the fish we eat. Worldwide, there is a growing knowledge and concern of how plastic waste is negatively influencing our life, our environment, our beaches, the life in the sea, our fishing industry, and our economy. Plastic is a useful thing that most of us use every day to ease our life, but the environmental impacts of the way we use it cannot be ignored. Reducing, reusing, and recycling can, however, bring us great green economy benefits. We can all make simple changes in our lifestyle and reduce use of plastic. Changing from plastic bags to multiple-use grocery bags and to use degradable waste bags are simple acts that can, if we all take part, make big changes. Local initiatives, as we have seen in two municipalities, Stykkishólmur in Árborg here in Iceland, where locals are exploring the possibilities of plastic bag-free communities and less plastic use are very important. Such initiative with the aim of reduced plastic in every life can reduce the amount of plastic that enters into the ocean and to the environment, and is the key to success from my point of view. To act upon the problem, we have had several initiatives in recent years. The United Nations are supporting a global framework for prevention and management of marine debris. The OSPAR Convention recently adopted a regional action plan on marine litter that applies for the Northeast Atlantic Ocean. We have several Nordic cooperation projects, and we have numerous national and local projects. All this work is with the aim of handling the problem better and more effectively and to understand it in more depth. In spite of that holistic quantification of waste that ends in the ocean are not available today, it is obvious that the magnitude of waste in the ocean is huge. It enters into the sea by various means, by littering, from poorly managed landfills and waste sites, from tourist activities and sea-based activities. Part of this litter sinks to this ocean floor, while other floats and waste can travel long distance on ocean currents, polluting shorelines, accumulating in massive ocean islands, and spreading invasive species. The environmental damage and the economic burden of cleaning up the litter have been confirmed in many reports. It can cause mortality or illness when sea creatures ingest the litter, entanglement of animals, and it can cause damage to important habitats such as corals. A growing concern is then over the chemical contamination that can occur when plastic deteriorates and enters into the ecosystem's chain and affects our life. The key issue is therefore to prevent the litter entering into our waters and ecosystems. Marine litter is a complex problem, and it is good to have here at this venue lecturers and participants from so many countries and organizations that will shed light on the issue and help us to understand it better. As it is a complex problem caused by various factors, it has to be tackled from many angles. Therefore, I am content to see how this conference has been structured. That is to address the problem from many sides and very importantly, aiming at solutions. The Nordic countries have had an extensive and successful cooperation on environmental issues for more than 40 years. Healthy marine environment and ecosystems are of great importance to life and welfare for all the Nordic countries and worldwide. Iceland has the chairmanship, as Kristín Linda mentioned, of the Nordic Council of Ministers this year. In our chairmanship program, we have put a special focus on the bioeconomy in the Nordic countries. Clean and healthy oceans play a significant role in the bioeconomy, and to underline this, we have arranged this conference as a part of our chairmanship program. The agenda we have in front of us is exciting, and the results will hopefully give us some tools and create ways that we can use to fight plastic waste in our oceans. On the agenda, we have a contribution from plastic producers, from the fishery sector, from the waste management sector. Importantly, all with a view on a possible solution. The OSPAR Regional Action Plan on Marine Litter was adopted at the OSPAR Commission meeting this summer unanimously by all parties. This is a progressive plan, and we will have a lecture on it today. This will be very interesting for us here in Iceland, as I am very interested to go along with the plan. We will have lectures from German Federal Environmental Agency that will inform us on the results from conference on prevention and management of marine litter in European seas, and we surely can learn something from that. We also learn about microplastics in the sea and the microplastics from consumer goods that will be very interesting to know more about. Marine litter is not only about plastic, but here today we are focusing on that part because of the excessive use of it in our daily life, both by the industry and the general public. Marine litter is, however, a part of a bigger problem, that is an immense consumption of goods and resources in the modern world, especially here in the Western world. Plastic being only one of the items that we are using excessively. Reduce, reuse, and recycling should therefore be the focus of all aspects of our daily life. We have to live in harmony with nature, and taking good care of our own waste is part of the responsibility we should all take. You have a heavy agenda in front of you, and I hope that this will be a productive day. I look forward to see the solutions that will result from the conference, and I hope at the end of the day we have all learned something that we can bring forward to our homes in order to make our oceans better. Thank you, and have a good day.
Well, like you have all noticed, you have in your conference portfolio a little introductory note that we hope that will be a good starting point for today's discussion. We also sent it to you yesterday, but hopefully you didn't print it because we've already printed it for you. And also one note, there are pencils and papers on the stand there in the corner. And of course, we try to be totally plastic-free at this conference. But next in the podium is Hildur Knútsdóttir, a writer, and she will give us the view of the public with the emphasis on citizen science. Hildur.
Good morning. My name is Hildur Knútsdóttir. I'm from Iceland, and I am a writer, admittedly one that is very interested in environmental issues, but just a writer nonetheless. So I'm going to leave the facts and the details about marine plastic pollution to the experts who you will hear from later on in the program. They are much more qualified to talk about the facts of the matter than I am, so I thought that I would discuss the feelings of the matter. And frankly, it's horrifying, the amount of plastics that are currently in our oceans and the havoc they are wreaking on the environment. And take it from me, the writer with a keen sensibilities, there's nothing like a vast global problem to make you feel small, insignificant, and useless. And that's basically how I feel most of the time. You see, I'm not just a writer, I am also a feminist and someone who is deeply worried about climate change. And in both cases, it feels like me and my handful of activist friends against the system so deeply ingrained in our society that it is often hard to know where your own thoughts end and the indoctrination of the system takes over. Patriarchy is so pervasive, it's everywhere you look, even in your own mind, and the ideas you take for truths. And our societies are so dependent on the burning of fossil fuels that it's hard to imagine a world without them. And yet we must. So the question that I have been pondering for the last few years is, how do you find the energy and the will to keep fighting a problem that is so enormous, so monstrously huge, when you know that your actions will probably mean very little in the grand scheme of things? How do you soldier on in the light of that knowledge? As I pondered this dilemma, I realized that what was in my mind a very practical question, one of how can I carry on fighting every day against the odds, really turned out to be not a practical question at all, but rather a moral one. And the answer, for me at least, turned out to be, how can I not? You see, I found that it really boils down to this. This is a big, big world, and I am but a very small part of it. And my individual actions are not very likely to have any significant impact in the grand scheme of things. I am not very likely to smash the patriarchy on my own, avert the looming crisis of climate change, or clean up the oceans with my bare hands, no matter how hard I might try. However, and this is a very big and significant however, I feel it is my responsibility to do everything in my power to try to right the wrongs that keep me up at night. It's quite simply the only way that I think I can live with myself. So I keep fighting for what I believe in and doing what I think is right, not because I harbor any illusions about saving the world, but because living any other way has become unthinkable. So I speak up about gender discrimination every chance I get. I take part in activism against global warming, and I try to limit my own personal carbon footprint as much as I can. And I recycle almost religiously, which is perhaps fitting as we live in a society where consumerism is almost a religion. Politicians, at least in this country, talk about increased consumption as a good thing. They use it as a tool to measure how well we, as a society, are doing. It always depresses the hell out of me, because after a lot of pondering, I have come to the conclusion that consumerism is basically the root of all that is wrong in the world. Patriarchy treats women as disposable objects. Crazy consumerism is one of the main forces that drive our seemingly insatiable hunger for cheap fossil fuels, thus driving climate change. Consumer culture constantly tells us that we are somehow subpar human beings and then tells us what we have to buy to fix ourselves. So we slave away at our jobs and spend the meager earnings on stuff we don't really need. And a lot of that stuff ends up in our oceans. And it makes no sense, really, because endless growth and endlessly increasing consumption simply isn't possible in a world where resources are limited. I don't think I can really do anything to change the minds of our politicians regarding how we measure the prosperity of a culture. But since at least one of them is here today, I would like to suggest another measuring tool. How about happiness rather than consumption, or health, free time, or overall well-being rather than GDP? It's just a thought. Marine plastic pollution is an enormous problem that I am not very likely to solve on my own. I am putting a lot of faith in the people who are here today, but what I personally can do is not add to the problem. I can't take responsibility for the actions of others, although those actions surely affect me whether I like it or not. But I can take responsibility for my own actions. I can consume wisely, I can stop using plastic bags, I can sit down at a coffee shop to enjoy my coffee rather than ordering it to go. I can choose not to eat at restaurants that only offer disposable cutlery and glasses. And I can buy less stuff. Plastic is useful. It's hard to imagine daily life without it, and I'm not saying anyone should. We just use way too much of it and take way too little care in how we dispose of it. What we can do is make sure the plastics we do use end up in the recycle bin and not in our oceans, breaking down into tiny pieces, absorbing nasty chemicals, and creeping up our food chain. And maybe, just maybe, my individual actions can affect the actions of other individuals. I recently read some very promising research papers that argue that peer pressure is one of the most powerful tools to change behavior. I, for one, really hope they are right. So I guess my bottom line is this. The only way is forward, doing what we can, doing what we must, because the alternative isn't really an alternative at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Hildur, for your inspiring talk. I always believe that every individual and every person can come up with the idea that will change things. Because in the end, every idea starts with one individual. It's how we sort of like come together to fulfill the aim that really matters then, sort of like going for all the way. But next up is Stephanie Werner. She's coming from the German Federal Environmental Agency, UBA, and she will tell us about the conference that was held in Berlin on marine litter.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. First of all, I of course want to thank the organization committee for inviting me to that very interesting conference, hopefully, but I suppose so, and to that most beautiful island. On my part, it's today to talk a bit about the scope and nature of the marine litter issue in general, and then to give you a short introduction into the results of the international conference on prevention and management of marine litter in European seas we held last year in Berlin. Of course, marine litter is deeply rooted in our production and consumption patterns. So the factor human being is the most important one in that issue. A recent paper in the journal Nature counted back that in 1900, around 220 million people were living in urban areas, producing less than 300,000 tons of daily wastes, whereas at this stage we didn't have any plastics. And they predicted that in 2025, an estimated 5.8 billion people will live in cities globally, producing an estimated amount of more than 6 million tons of daily waste. You can see what that waste which is already produced means in highly populated areas. On the right-hand side, you see the river Citarum, which flows through Jakarta in Indonesia, where the river is used as a waste bin in itself. But you can find plastic waste, especially everywhere in the world. The other picture shows you a little seabird at the St. Brendan Islands in the Indian Oceans. This is an inhabited island, and you can see that oily cans coming probably from shipping there as well. If we look, or if we try to define marine litter, it's defined as any solid material which is discarded by intention or lost into the marine environment. So all materials such as glass, metal, and others fall under that definition. But what worries us most is, of course, plastics, because we find it in the highest percentages. So these are here data from the OSPA beach litter monitoring for the Northeast Atlantic, showing us that 3/4 of all litter items found consist of plastics. That goes up to 83% for the Mediterranean, and also in the Baltic Sea, most of items with 55% consist of plastics. The big problem with that, which is also the very high advantage, but for the marine environment, it really it's a big failure. It's the degradation times of plastics. If you look at a single-used plastic bag, it takes up to 20 years to decompose. That goes up to 600 years for a monofilament fishing line like nylon, which takes up to 600 years. A plastic bottle needs 450 years. Of course, that's all just estimations, as we just started to produce plastics in the 1950s. In the middle of the 1950s, an estimated amount of 1.5 million tons were produced annually. And today we are on an amount of 280 million tons produced every year, a quarter of that in Europe, with big exporting nations such as Germany and Italy. So even for my German colleagues, we are quite good in our waste management system, but the keyword of producer responsibility becomes a real issue in that. So if you look at the plastic value chain, in 2012, 57 million tons were produced in Europe. They then went into export or were consumed national-wise, and through the consumer demand, 25.2 million tons of plastic waste were produced. 60% around are going into energy recovery or recycling, and the other 40% are disposed, mainly on landfills or ending up somehow else in the environment, also the marine environment. So we have annual plastic waste production in Europe of 9.6 million tons. If we look directly into the marine environment, there are certain types of plastic which are frequently reported. According to the Convention of Biological Diversity, 2 types of plastics are mostly responsible for the negative interactions with marine life and habitats. This is geo-related plastics such as polyethylene, polypropylene, nylon, and polyester, and also packaging-related plastics. Again, polyethylene, polypropylene, PVC, polyester, and polystyrene, which is known for cooling fish at sea and as fish boxes. Sources and the introductory pathways can be divided into sea-based sources and land-based sources. Sea-based sources, of course, commercial fish shipping, recreational shipping, fishing vessels, as well as aquaculture installations, but also other industrial offshore installations such as gas platforms and drilling rigs, but also natural events like storms cause often the loss of, for example, plastic pellets, which are transported via the sea path for later productions of consumer articles. And if one container gets lost, a high number of pellets is spilled. Prominent land-based sources is littering in general along the coast by tourists, by mass events such as festivals along the coasts. Of course, also by industrial facilities such as harbors, shipbreaking yards. Shipbreaking yards, it's, for example, a very important introduction pathway for microplastics because microplastics are used to clean ships with blasting systems. Also, municipalities, waste get introduced prominently via the riverine input path and waters as well as the discharge from storm water drains. So if you look where all that litter ends up, 70% according to its denseness or also according to biofouling sinks to the seafloor, and 15% are to be found in the water column and at the sea surface, and another 15% are reaching the ocean shores. So some prominent numbers on the marine litter pollution. Up to 10% of plastics produced worldwide end up remain and accumulate in the world oceans, but that's a really high estimate. NOAA accounts for 100 million tons already present in the world oceans. There's an annual input estimated by the World Ocean Review 2010 with 6.4 million tons, but that accounts for all marine litter. No, that accounts only for plastics. So if you then have a look at the general introduction, the European Commission deals with a number of 10 million tons introduced every year. 1/10 of it accounts for abandoned and lost fishing gear. UNEP published a number of 13,000 plastic particles per square kilometer ocean surface. In the North Sea area, we know from the OSPA beach litter monitoring that we found an average of 712 items per 100-meter coastlines. And for the Mediterranean, we have a number of around 250 million particles floating on the sea surface and in the upper water column. As I said, a big issue are the remains of fishing gear. There was a big study funded by the European Commission which came up with numbers of nets lost in certain European fisheries. And I want to point out at the very bottom of that table, that is a deep water net fisheries on sharks and monkfish in the Northeast Atlantic, where an estimated length of 1,254 kilometers of nets are lost every year, which accounts for a number of around 25,000 nets. Of course, that has severe ecological impacts. The ingestion of marine litter is known for 43% of all cetaceans, all sea turtles, around a third of seabirds, and many fish and invertebrates. Entanglement is frequently reported for 136 marine species. Marine litter is also known to transport non-endemic species and new habitats beyond invasive species, and also algae with toxic blooms. Another impact is a hardening of benthic substrate and smoothing of benthic symbiotic communities. And as you all probably know, in the last year we had a massive new amount of study coming on. So the CBD accounted for a 40% increase of evidence on that, whereas 76% of the interactions relate to plastics. One example is a northern fulmar, a seabird which is solely feeding out at sea. It's a small relative of the albatross. It has colonies, for example, in Iceland, but also we have one colony at Helgoland in Germany. And in the North Sea, more than 95% of dead found birds have plastic in their stomachs. In average, 31 pieces, which accounts for 0.3 grams. If you look at new data from Iceland, also around 80% of the birds have plastics in their stomach, an average 0.15 gram. There's a so-called EcoQO, ecological quality objective for the North Sea, or for the Northeast Atlantic, saying that less than 10 birds are allowed to have more than 0.1 gram in their stomach. That's the so-called good status. And that's only reached in the Canadian Arctic, where still 40% have plastics in their stomach, but less than 0.1 gram. So the highest amounts are found in the English Channel area and in the Skagerrak, and that's what you can see here on that slide. That's 0.6 gram, and that's, if that would be scaled to human size, you would have like, that amount of waste in your stomach, which of course you can imagine cause a false sense of saturation a lot of times. It also blockages the digestive tract. It can cause injury, internal injury, so a lot of different physical disturbance and injuries, and it can also lead to death. So I dissected birds with Jan von Franeker, and a lot of times they are very thin, so you can see they have nothing to add anymore, and probably they were starving to death. So the other picture is a Laysan albatross from the North Hawaiian Islands, where one of 6 chicks never makes it out to sea because they are fed by their parents with plastic particles and die beforehand. So that's even a population impact effect in that sense. Okay, we have another talk on microplastics later on today. I don't want to say a lot about that, but there are some additional risks from microplastics. Microplastic is all plastics of 5 millimeters and smaller. Many polymers are known to be inert, but of course mechanical injuries in the digestive tracts remain an issue, also with the smaller particles and smaller organisms. Of course, there are chemicals which can leach out also products which are not really binded in the polymer matrix and can also then get into the organisms feeding those items. And there's another issue that persistent organic pollutants are known to absorb in high accumulations on the surface of microplastics and can therefore potentially also be ingested by marine organisms. There's a quite new study on fish which has been in the laboratory fed with plastic particles which were found in a harbor and which already had absorbed quite a high level of organic pollutants, and these fish showed indices of liver inflammations. So, but that's all very early and very first evidences, and we need to get a lot of more research into these chemical effects, I think. There are also a lot of findings already now in freshwater systems, like the one by Ericsson in 2013, where in the Great Lakes an average of 43,000 microplastics were found per square kilometer. A new study even show a high pollution with microplastics in a large remote mountain lake. Moore et al. Found an introduction of 2 billion plastics particles in the Los Angeles basin in 3 days from 2 river mouths. And there's also a quite recent study on the Danube River, where an average 317 plastic particles were found, but only 275 fish larvae per 1,000 cubic meters, which means a daily input of 4.2 tons plastics into the Black Sea. But the plastic industry claims that that was an accident. I haven't seen any evidence for that, so that needs to be clarified. So since 2008, we have a quite powerful tool in hand to combat that issue. Marine litter and plastics are for the first time really enshrined in law in the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, which was translated into national law in 2010. In 2012, we had to carry out the initial assessments and come up with a description of the status of our seas, come up with how we think good environmental status should be described for the 11 descriptors listed in the Annex 1. The 11 descriptors are for the most pressure factors like eutrophication, pollution, non-invasive species, and invasive species, of course, and others, fisheries, and but also marine litter and underwater noise, which are the 2 new indicators and 2 new descriptors which haven't been dealt before. Right now, we are developing the monitoring programs. And upcoming is the most important step, which is implementation of our national programs of measures. I think I have to speed up a bit. The descriptor 10 tells you that marine litter does not cause harm to the coastal and marine environment, which is not a very quantitative description, but we hope that will be much more quantified within the next assessment cycle, so that that directive will be reassessed every 6 years. And what the Commission's decisions of 2010 tells us, we have to look into litter at the shore, at the sea surface, in the water column, at the sea bottom. Also, we have to look into the amounts and trends of microparticles, as well as litter ingested by marine animals. Of course, there are other impacts which need to be covered and addressed within the next assessment cycle, but that's where the thing started off with. There's a task group, it was called task group, now it's a technical group in place, set up by the European Commission, which I co-chaired together with the Joint Research Center and François Gargani from the Ifremer. A lot of persons might know him. So we tried to come up in the last 3 years with recommendations how to proper monitor marine litter on harmonized protocols, harmonized methodologies. And right now we hope that recommendations are picked up by European member states in order to come to a common approach on monitoring. Now I want to shift to the International Conference on Prevention and Management of Marine Litter in European Seas, where we beforehand thought, okay, what could be a real additional value now to all the ongoing efforts, also by the European Commission. And then the conference partners, which was the European Commission DG Environment, my ministry, as well as the agency I work for, we said, okay, regional action plans could be a real important tool for that transboundary issue. So we then set up the conference in Berlin, which was from the 10th to 12th April in 2013. And we got all the regional sea conventions, the European Regional Seas Conventions, into the organizing committee, which I think was a great move because we had I come to that later, and we had, of course, some consultants helping out with that. We had 200 participants from regional sea conventions, member states, European Commission, UNEP, NOAA, national authorities, NGOs, industry, and science. The conference webpage is still online if you want to have a look. There are all posters, all presentations, all discussions are published there, as well as an online database where people fed in best practice examples for measures, as well as initiatives to combat marine litter. And that database is now to be used for the regional sea conventions for the development and implementation of the regional action plans. So the aims of this conference, probably similar to the ones today, was a perception that marine litter is a global pressure, as it was also called by UNEP in 2011 as one of the most emerging issues for the marine environment, where international cooperation is required. As I said, the initiation and further development of regional action plans were focused on this conference to prevent further inputs from land and sea-based sources and to reduce present marine litter. This conference was a European contribution to the Honolulu strategy as a global action plan initiated by UNEP and NOAA, and also to Rio Plus 20, which calls for a significant reduction of marine litter by 2025. We shared initiatives, best practices. We had like 70 talks on actions going on and commitments made by certain parties. And that all was also set up to support the EU member states in the development and coherent implementation of their programs of measures in 2015-16. We had an issue paper developed, which is also still to be found on the conference page, where it went through several commenting rounds by the regional sea conventions, where we had a review on the ecological impacts, a regional evaluation on sources, amounts, materials, items, and composition of marine litter, which is now also the basis for the development for the regional action plans. We had a chapter on guiding principles and on target setting. We also had a breakout session on target setting, and this now found its way into the 7th European Environmental Programme of the European Commission, which was recently setting up a 20% reduction target until 2020 as a political headline target. We discovered on the legal framework globally, European-wise and regional-wise. And the chapter 5 was a most important chapter because here we laid out a stepwise procedure for the development of those regional action plans, which were then discussed in lengthy breakout groups to get a common understanding on the predominant sources and pathways, to get first thoughts on operational targets and the measures required to account for the certain regional situation, and also to get an agreed common understanding on the data gaps. Annex 1 and 2 lists the measures and initiatives which are also part of the database, so have a look if you're interested in that. I just took here the example of the OSPA breakout group because at the next talk we hear about the OSPA REP, which we were successful to develop already. So most of the measures which were discussed dealt with prevention, which is of course the key to tackle marine litter. So for the OSPA area, it was thought that improved waste management, phasing out of landfilling will be a key measure. The ban tax on single-use bags was considered to be important, which these taxes then going into environmental funds. The elimination and change of certain products on the market. We are right now working intensively on voluntary agreement with the industry on microplastics and cosmetic products. We have research. We have studies available now on the amounts of microplastic used in different areas of application, and a lot of companies already stepped out, and it looks like within the next 3 years there might be a common approach on that. Other prevention measures are, of course, education and outreach, the development of schooling material, and so on and so on. Increased knowledge on riverine litter and microplastic were considered to be the most important outstanding issues. We had then some measures on law and enforcement, like an approach on a harmonized fee system for the port reception facility, which is right now in the revision process. So we hope that we can influence with that joint OSPA approach the review of the European Commission to get a compulsory implementation of a no special fee system or something similar in place. Enforcement and control, of course, of international legislation. We have a lot of things in place under the IMO, under third parties, which need to be enforced out at sea and controlled. And for removal, the existing fishing for litter initiative was considered to be enlarged. It should also address the participating harbors, and that is now part of the plan, but we come to that later. So very shortly, of course, the goals are clear: prevent and reduce, remove existing litter, enhance knowledge and awareness. And of course, a big issue is the cooperation with other relevant organizations. We will soon have the second workshop for the development of the REP for the HELCOM area. And back to that, the regional sea conventions will join and see which measures can be combined. As we heard, the OSPA REP is already adopted as an agreement this year in Cascais, Portugal. We have some common indicators set up for under OSPA for beach litter, seafloor, and fulma monitoring. HELCOM sets the approach in its ministerial declaration in 2013 to have a REP in place in 2015. It looks like we will hopefully meet that target. And there are common indicator development under the core set 2 right now for beach litter, seafloor, and microplastics in the water column. Medpol has already adopted a regional action plan on marine litter in December 2013 under the land-based sources protocol, and the Black Sea Commission is still considering how to use. Okay, I don't want to go through the message of Berlin, which reclaims a lot of measures and points which are really necessary to be taken, and a lot of things like the headline targets and the action plans are already in work and ongoing, so a lot of these points are already addressed. And yeah, if you're interested, look at the conference page where you also find the message of Berlin, which was commented and in the end agreed by the participants of that conference. And with that, I thank you a lot for your attention and look forward to an interesting day. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. And our last speaker for the coffee break is Emily Cochran. She's coming from the OSPAR Convention, and she will tell us a little bit about the OSPAR Regional Action Plan on Marine Litter. Please, Emily.
Good morning, everybody. It's nice to almost see you. It's quite blinding here, so excuse me when I squint. Conference participants, I believe that it's my job now to talk to you a little bit about some of the actions that contracting parties to the OSPAR Convention have agreed to take to help deal with this problem that we've been hearing about. And Stephanie has set me up really nicely to be able to pick up the story, and we'll go a little bit more into detail about the issue in the OSPAR context, and the genesis of the work and the genesis of the Regional Action Plan, in fact. So it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much to the conference organisers for inviting OSPAR to be here. And with no further ado, we'll get started. So just to make sure we all know where we are and who the OSPAR Commission is, who's involved, who are the contracting parties to this international agreement, and where it is that we're talking about. There's a little map at the top. You see it goes from the North Pole all the way down the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and then across to the southern tip to the Straits of Gibraltar. So it's an enormous area, and I'll talk a little bit more about it later in the context of what that means in terms of what the Regional Action Plan is. But I just wanted to make sure from the get-go that we all know what we're talking about and where we are. And of course that Iceland is one of the contracting parties to this convention. So marine litter was first put on the OSPAR agenda by Sweden in 1994. And the aim at that point was to reach a common understanding on the nature and scale of what the problem was, and also what could be done about it within the context of OSPAR. From that point, marine litter was put within the programme that OSPAR has on monitoring and assessment, and this really set the stage for the cooperation between the OSPAR countries for dealing with the issue of marine litter. We've heard quite a lot now about what marine litter is, and it comprises a whole range of stuff that we discard in various aspects of our society. But again, it's the plastic that is really very, very dominant, and almost 90% of the litter that is found on the beaches in the OSPAR beach litter monitoring surveys is plastic. So OSPAR ministers, when they met in Bergen in 2010, agreed that this wasn't adequate, this wasn't a good situation, and that something needed to happen, and committed at that point that actions and measures would need to be taken in order to achieve a significant reduction. This was put then into the Northeast Atlantic Environment Strategy, which essentially is a roadmap for the OSPAR countries to help fulfill the obligations under the convention between 2010 and 2020. And so at that point, the objective of having a substantially reducing marine litter in the OSPAR maritime area to levels where properties and quantities do not cause harm to the marine environment. You'll recognise that there is a very similar wording to the wording that Stephanie showed us a minute ago on the wording for the EU MSFD descriptor. So from this starting point in 1994 through to 2010, there were already a large number of projects that were being undertaken both at the national level by the countries of the North East Atlantic and also collectively. There's the monitoring work on the plastic in former stomachs, initiatives for removal of plastics and litter through the Fishing for Litter initiative. And as you can see from this slide, Stephanie also talked about the plastic in the former stomach and the ecological quality objective with a target of having 10% of birds to have less than 0.1. And this is a graph on the left here to show how far over in many regions the results came in, that the amount of plastic is far in excess in all regions of the North East Atlantic. And that wasn't good, but that's clearly not a good situation, and something has to be done. And it was agreed that more should be done. The fact that the oceans are dynamic, the fact that the currents are taking the water masses and everything contained within them across borders means that the only way to deal with this is through cooperation between the countries. On the 27th of June this year in Cascais, the countries that are contracting parties of the OSPAR Commission agreed to the regional action plan for managing and prevention of marine litter. This is a culmination of an awful lot of work and a massive step forward. I'm going to come back to that, but again, just very quickly, we've seen this slide now, we've seen who's involved, but I just wanted to put up on the screen here just the main objectives. Unfortunately, my colour scheme looks to have been a poor choice. But the main objectives of OSPAR: prevention and elimination of pollution, protecting the marine environment against adverse effects of human activities, safeguarding health, human health that is, and conserving marine ecosystems. So within all of these objectives, you can very clearly see where the question of marine litter fits into the work of the Convention. In the North East Atlantic Environment Strategy that I mentioned previously, the work concerning marine litter fits into the thematic strategy on biological diversity and ecosystems, and is one of the many human activities that is dealt with under the Convention. He always likes to come and save the day. Although he's suffering a little bit here as well from the effects of marine plastics. Just before I move on to the Regional Action Plan, just two things that I should mention about the way OSPAR works that is significant to this Regional Action Plan and how it will be implemented in the future. So OSPAR works through consensus. That means that all the countries around the table have to come to an agreement. So the adoption of the Regional Action Plan has been agreed by consensus by all the countries and all the contracting parties of the Convention. The other thing is that OSPAR works by a lead country approach, so that a country takes forward the different elements of work and champions them, bringing the other contracting parties and observers along. And in this case, in fact, it was Germany that was the lead country, and in fact, Stephanie that has been leading a lot of the work. So yes, these things are important to note when we talk about what it is and what this means. So the starting point for the Regional Action Plan goes back to the agreement of the Honolulu Strategy, which we've heard about. And that is a framework for comprehensive and global efforts to reduce the ecological, the human health and the economic impacts of marine debris across the world. Following the agreement of that back in 2011, As you saw, the Regional Seas Conventions were asked to contribute to the 2013 European Conference and outline the needs for regional action plans and how to take forward regionally coordinated programmes and measures, in part as a contribution to the EU Marine Strategy Framework Directive. So, see what we've got now. Yes, something that's important here is that the scale of the problem is something that crosses all sectors of our community and our society. There are environmental issues associated with it, economic, health and cultural. And as you see from the slide on the screen, the sources of this marine litter are very broad. Not only do they affect all these sectors, have an impact on the sectors, the sources are coming from these sectors, but also these sectors are going to have to be a part of the solution to the problem. So the Regional Action Plan sets out a plan to be applied to the whole of the OSPAR maritime area, and by implementing collective action will substantially reduce marine litter from both the sea and land-based sources. It recognises that there will need to be participation from a broad range of stakeholders, including international organisations, private sector, NGOs, and others, industry, and general public as well. The Regional Action Plan is divided into 4 sections which set out what it's hoping to do, the type of actions that are going to be implemented, how these are going to be measured and assessed to see how well we're doing, and also, and critically, who's going to be doing what and when, the implementation plan. It's a flexible tool, and it's also meant to be implemented at different levels. So it's designed to be implemented, some of the actions collectively by the countries under the auspices of the OSPAR framework. Some are actions that contracting parties can take forward nationally as part of their national programmes and measures under the Marine Strategy Framework Directive or under their national management regimes. And then thirdly, there are also actions that fall under the competence of others. Stephanie introduced some of the types of actions that we're talking about. So, for example, as collective actions, multinational projects with the fishing industry and with competent authorities to develop and promote best practice in relation to marine litter and what happens to litter coming from those sectors. Reduction of the consumption of single-use plastic bags and their presence in the environment. And also developing a common communication strategy to help communicate messages across the region. At a national level, an example is we're seeking cooperation with the river and river basin authorities. As you saw, the amount of litter that is coming into the sea from rivers, it's important to tie up actions that are happening in the marine environment with those actions that are happening on the land and coming in through the rivers. So, what do we do next? We've got a regional action plan. It's available on the front page of our website. I encourage you to go and have a look, have a good read through it. There's a lot of information in there. But agreeing a regional action plan is the first step. We've decided what we want to do and who's going to do it. But the real big deal is going to be actually getting on and doing this, implementing the plan and starting to see the results. The scope of the regional action plan is wide. It's going to be a challenge, firstly identifying where you start. As we heard right at the beginning, it's a massive problem. But we will find where to start. And there are also many sources, as I've said, of sources of litter from many sectors. It will require OSPAR to have a clear understanding of which are the elements of the regional action plan that lie within its competence and where there are actions that should be undertaken by others or in partnership with others. It would be a challenge within the OSPAR family to ensure that those partnerships are created. And sometimes they may be new partnerships, partnerships that haven't traditionally been found in the past. So we're now at the next step, the getting on and doing it bit. And in terms of what we're getting on and doing, the next step is to have a workshop. There'll be a workshop happening actually in the beginning of October in The Hague, where all the task managers responsible for the implementation of these actions that are due in a first tranche, the start point, is going to be taking place, as well as putting into action the communication strategy. And then secondly, there's going to be a meeting between all of the regional seas conventions that are developing marine litter action plans to look and to sit together and share progress and experiences, and also look at how between the regional action plans there are actions that could be undertaken in common. So we've got some exciting times ahead, some good challenges, and hopefully in future, well, in the not too distant future, there'll be some good results to report and some significant effects in decreasing the amount of litter that enters our marine environment in the North East Atlantic. As I said, information is available on the website. The address is now on the screen. I encourage you to have a look, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Emily. Emily talked about partnerships and the importance of creating partnership. Well, now we have a coffee break. So you have now the chance to do exactly what she was recommending, creating partnerships. We will start at about 10:25 again. So see you after a short coffee break. It's just outside here. It's not as easy to do it with a pencil as with plastic, but we are a plastic-free conference. So I just wanted to tell you that from a little bit from our organizer, from the Nordic group, we have a few, distinguished individuals in it. It was Helgi Jensson from the Environmental Agency and Sigurrós Friðriksdóttir, also from the Environmental Agency. Then we had Cecilia Bjarnadóttir from the Icelandic Ministry for the Environment and Natural Resources, Jóhannes Danielsson from the Faroe Marine Research Institute, and Rúnar Mathiesen from the Norwegian Environment Agency. But next in the podium is Markus Eriksson from Five Gyres Institution, and he will have a presentation on microplastics. Welcome.
Well, good morning. My name is Markus Eriksson. I'm the Director of Research for the Five Gyres Institute. I'm going to talk about our research globally. We have sailed through all 5 subtropical gyres in the last 5 years, about 40,000 miles of sailing. And just recently, we sailed from Bermuda here to Iceland about 3 months ago in June of this year. But first, I'm going to show you a bunch of slides and images of our global expeditions so you can see what we do and what I've discovered in terms of microplastic distribution around the world. So I filleted this fish thinking I'm going to eat it, and here's what I found. It's full of plastic. This is the whole reason that we're out here, to bring this to your attention. The plastic isn't benign. The fish won't pass it. The plastic is full of persistent organic pollutants, things like PCBs, DDT, PAHs, things that are known human carcinogens and endocrine disruptors, things you don't want in your body, but they're in the fish that we eat. I don't want plastic for my sushi. So I caught that fish 6 years ago. One of my more enjoyable times at sea was aboard this raft. Our first big project for public awareness was to take a Cessna aircraft and put 15,000 plastic bottles under it and drift from California to Hawaii. What I thought would be like a 4 to 6 week voyage was actually 13 weeks, 88 days at sea. So I enjoyed my time at sea. Had no choice in this matter, but it sort of gave me an introduction to not just the PR side of this, but the science of microplastics. That video you saw was me 2 months into this voyage, out of food, caught a fish in the middle of nowhere, and found microplastics in its stomach. And I know this issue is one that is a concern to you, being a culture that's surrounded by the fishing industry. It's part of your identity. My identity, my mother is Icelandic. She grew up just maybe 1 kilometer from here. But when I was 3 years old, moved to the United States, so I've lived in the US pretty much all my life. But being an Erickson, I always thought, oh, my great-great-great-grandfather might be Leif Erikson. And I did this voyage, and I've led about 14 expeditions now to all the subtropical gyres and beyond. And then when I came here and I met a bunch of my cousins when I landed 2.5 months ago, I learned of something called Iceland Book, and I realized everyone's related to Leif Erikson. So our expedition that we just did in June began in Bermuda, about 2,400 miles here to Reykjavik. We did 31 surface tows. So the research I do is very simple. We drag a very fine mesh net across the ocean surface, and we sort of figure out how many particles per square kilometer, by count, by weight, by type, and by size. And that gives us an idea of sort of what's out there, how much, and where it is. I'm also looking at vertical distribution. So I just invented this little trawl, and this gives us an idea of every 50 centimeters going down to 6.5 meters, what the distribution might be. One big gap in our understanding of plastics, microplastics worldwide, is how sea state might affect that vertical distribution. What I have found sort of anecdotally is that when the waves come up, the plastic goes down. And in the worst storm ever, when I was still trawling, I only found like giant particles on the surface. Even the same things as big as a pea were pushed deep downward. So that's an important gap to fill. And then, of course, on expeditions, I always find a time of day that we can stop the boat and just jump in the water. And there's nothing like jumping in and realizing there are like 5 kilometers of just blue emptiness below you. But it's not really empty. It's full of life. Doing this at night is a phenomenal experience. So as I lead these expeditions, and now seeing that in some cases there's much more plastic than biota, it's very worrisome. So how did we get into this mess? How did this start? If you go back, 60 years, this idea of throwaway culture kind of began. In the US, we began making all kinds of plastic materials, replacing metal and glass and paper with plastic. And the idea was just throw it away. And really, really weird uses for plastics. I mean, these are real ads from some magazines. And if that's creepy, get a load of that one. And if you're not creeped out yet, there's the triple whammy. And you saw this slide already showing the increase in the production. So it's really gone from being nothing in the 50s until now 288 million tons of plastics produced worldwide. Now I'm going to come back to this sort of slide in a little while, this idea, that number, 288 million. But here's the result of throwaway living. And you saw other images of this. These are not like isolated incidents. We see these around the world. I just came back last week from sailing Bali to Christmas Island in Australia. And on the windward side of Christmas Island, there was trash up to my knees. Just a single-use throwaway packaging coming from countries that have no waste management infrastructure whatsoever. So the work I do is looking at the distribution of microplastics worldwide by sailing through these gyres, all 5 of the subtropical gyres. Subtropical, meaning they're in the doldrums. In the middle here is where there is no wind. There's not much wind, not much current. When trash gets there, it gets stuck. And it begins to fall apart, begins to degrade. Now, I've gone through all 5 of these. What I do is I don't have my own sailboat. I'll charter a vessel, I'll count the empty seats, and divide the cost of charter by the seats, and I sell the seats as an eco-tour. And I get all these crazy people to spend like tons of money to come sail from Bermuda to Iceland on my boat. But it works. We use this equipment. You saw the trawl. We did the North Atlantic first in 2010, again 2013, and then again just recently. That's the distribution of our first study, and it looks like this. You find little small fish, little fish larvae, zooplankton, and microplastic particles. And the same we saw in the Indian Ocean. These are back to back from North Atlantic, went to Indian Ocean on a different vessel. In the Bay of Bengal and across the subtropical gyre, the same thing. You'll occasionally recognize a few big objects, but by and large, most of it is microplastic. The South Atlantic, same thing. And that was a lot of sailing. This was about 3 months going back and forth, and this assemblage of microplastics. You drag your net for about maybe, I'd say, 5 to 10 nautical miles, and you get a handful of plastic, like confetti, rice grain-sized fragments. In the South Pacific, the same thing. And the South Pacific was a very clear circulation system. We got, actually, the first 2 samples I collected had 0 plastic. It was my first ever. I got to the center, we were averaging 400,000 particles per square kilometer. So the gyres, the subtropical gyres, are areas where plastic accumulates and begins to fragment. It's just sitting there in the hot sun by mechanical and biodegradation and the way mechanics break it down. North Pacific, the same thing. I've got most of my data from here. That's my backyard. And once again, you recognize things. Everyone sees a toothbrush. Do y'all see the little spray nozzle? Do you see the gorilla? You gotta look closely. This is my infamous gorilla trawl, my first time finding a toy. And I trawled, I mean, it's a thin, tiny sliver in the middle of the ocean. And we got a little plastic toy in there. So what I do is I populate our model with all this data. I have 6 other colleagues that share data with me. So we've got thousands of data points. And then I have 2 oceanographers that they have a model based on inputs from dense coastal populations, river mouths, and shipping lanes. And then all of our data combined populates the model and calibrates the model. And that gives us an idea of what the standing stock weight and count of plastic is in the world's oceans. And this has taken me 5 years to get these numbers I'm going to show you. And the paper should be coming out in the next few weeks in a journal +1. This is the first global estimate of all plastics, all sizes, in all ocean waters. 270,000 tons from 5.25 trillion particles. So we go back to that slide from Plastics Europe, that 288 million tons of production in 1 year. The amount of trash on the ocean surface is less than a quarter of 1%. So the ocean surface, it's not the final resting place for plastics in the oceans. That's one place where it goes to fragment. Now, other things happen, which I'll talk about. So what's the source? Where is all this trash coming from? One source, and you saw another slide from Indonesia. This is Indonesia as well. Poor waste management. Much of the world, and I'm sure you've traveled to parts of Indonesia, Southeast Asia, Africa, and South America, waste management isn't the best. In some cases, non-existent. In Indonesia, the strategy is make your little pile of trash in your front yard, and every morning you burn it. And that doesn't work. That creates a lot of waste heading out to sea. Microfibers. Now, we're all responsible for this. Synthetic textiles are producing a lot of microfibers in wastewater. Up to 10,000 fibers per load, one scientist, Mark Brown, calculated. Derelict fishing gear. It's not uncommon to find these big giant nets in the North Pacific. Less than North Atlantic, North Pacific much more from Southeast Asian practices. And when you grab these nets, you grab them, your hand is full of little fibers, little microplastic fibers. They're degrading very fast. So one 500 kilogram net can produce hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of small particles of microplastics. And catastrophic events. We can't deny in the world today when you have a catastrophic event, when you have a hurricane or a cyclone or a flood or a tsunami, that the record of their existence in the world today is now plastic. So much waste comes off the land out to sea from these catastrophic events. So then what happens? It's all in the ocean bobbing around. What happens to this material? Photodegradation. Sunlight is breaking it down rather quickly. Some products, for example, I don't find plastic bags or foam polystyrene in the gyres very often. It's breaking down very fast. One plastic bag in a few years might shred to 10,000 small microplastic particles. So photodegradation happens really quickly. The plastic bags trade groups are very quick to point out there are no plastic bags in the middle of the ocean gyres. And I just explain why. Oxidation, that's breaking down plastics. Mechanical degradation, when sunlight makes plastic brittle, a few waves just begin to crush those plastics. For example, you might find like a bottle or a bucket lid or a crate in the ocean. When you grab it, pick it up out of the ocean, sometimes it just cracks right in your hands. It's so brittle. Biodegradation happens. We have seen that some microbes can eat small amounts of polyethylene, but in no way does this keep up with the input of polyethylene and polypropylene into the world's oceans. But it does happen. Fragmentation by grazing. I would argue that in the North Atlantic, and I just did this, I got this photograph in Bermuda, that fragmentation by grazing accounts for more rapid degradation of microplastics than sunlight or mechanical degradation or oxidation. It's not uncommon to find a plastic bottle, it could be a bleach bottle or a crate or a bucket washed up on the beach in Bermuda that just has fish bites all over it. And I think the culprit here are triggerfish. They have a very unattractive underbite, and they have two teeth that grab the plastic, and the top teeth will shear it in a triangular bite. So I think these are triggerfish that are making these bites. And there's the teeth right up there. So one fate is shoreline deposition. And I'm convinced that probably most of the trash that washed out to sea is going to wash back up on land somewhere. The windward side of islands, like where I was just last week in Christmas Island, Australia, the windward side is just, they become these recipients. The natural nets for trash in the world are the windward side of islands. This is on the Azores. When we sailed in 2010, the beaches there were just inundated. Deep sea deposition. We are now finding microplastics on the seafloor in the middle of the abyssal plain in the North and South Atlantic. How does it get there? How does a polyethylene fragment? It might be ingested by a fish and taken down to depth, and then the fish dies and the plastic stays there. Biofouling can make that happen. The impact, and you've seen some of these photographs. Entanglement, ingestion by birds. On land as well. Just 2 weeks ago, I have a colleague in Dubai that sent me this 40-kilogram mass of plastic bags from a camel stomach. Microplastic ingestion. We're finding rapidly the literature's coming in showing lots of animals are eating microplastics. Filter feeding or selectively feeding, they're grasping it. And when the particle is small enough, we're now finding that the smallest microplastics can get through the gut lining into the circulatory system of organisms. Here's a mussel in this case, some bivalves eating small, like 15-micron polystyrene fragments. And there's trophic level transfer. So a crab eats a mussel, a fish eats the crab, we eat the fish. Those microplastics, once they're in the food chain, we're finding they can migrate up to higher organisms. So it's not just one bird, one fish, one whale. It's across the board. The marine impacts are huge. So I would say that as plastic goes from our shorelines out to sea and it fragments and it becomes beach litter, it becomes the benthic floor litter, it's cycling through the entire marine ecosystem before it does so. So what does it matter to us? So very quickly, we know animals are eating plastics. We're finding them in lots of different kinds of fish species, including this rainbow runner that I caught. Plastic at sea has the ability to absorb all kinds of compounds. So pesticides will stick to plastics. Oil drops from cars will stick to plastics. Industrial chemicals stick to plastics. And there's one fellow, Richard Thompson in the UK, has found that in the gut of organisms, the presence of a different pH and temperature and gut surfactants can actually pull those chemicals off the plastic and hold them inside the organism. One study we did in the South Atlantic, we found that those are our sample sites for plastics. I had a colleague, Chelsea Rockman, who was collecting fish. We found that as we found more flame retardants on the microplastic particles, we also found flame retardants inside the fish at higher levels. There was a correlation there between the two. So now we're seeing the microplastics can impact fisheries. And this is an open world for research. We need much more data on this subject. Before my wife, before she gave birth, we had her blood tested for chemicals from plastics, for PCBs, flame retardants. We found really, really high levels of phthalates, flame retardants, and PCBs in her body. And this is like the ultimate legacy of all the synthetic chemistry of last century. It's like an experiment on the development of humans this century. That's the legacy that we have created. How do we solve this? One obvious one is waste management. Other parts of the world need to have improved waste management. Also, anti-litter laws. If someone dumps their ashtray on the street, I mean, they should pay a huge fine. In other parts of the world, developed world, we don't see, like in Los Angeles, where I live, in LA, there's piles of trash everywhere. People dumping their home construction project on the side of the road. Anti-litter laws, they can work if they're enforced. Waste management, but I think smarter products. And here's where this recent expedition comes in. In the Great Lakes, we went through 3 of the Great Lakes. We sampled 21 sites, and we began finding microplastic particles. In fact, more microplastics than what I find in my ocean samples. That was a typical sample from the Great Lakes. And it astonished me because I could recognize a lot of the pieces here. I mean, they were perfect little spheres. And you can guess what they are. They're microbeads from these facial scrubs. And I brought one to show you, just so you can see just how much there is in these tubes. This could be like one little facial application. Where'd it go? All right. So all the soap is gone, it's just the plastics. And what I did with this product, I took like maybe half a gram of the cream and filtered the plastics out in a black sheet, and I counted 6,000 microbeads. And I estimate in that product that there are 1/3 of a million microbeads in that product. So every 3 tubes, that's 1 million microbeads washing down the drain. So that's where the industry has responsibility, to create smarter products. And I think that there should be a new ethic in the world today. If you're going to make a product and you're going to use plastic, knowing what we know now, if you do not have an efficient recovery system, if you do not have waste management, anti-litter laws, a way to get it back, then you can't use plastic because it just pollutes the planet. And with 7 billion customers in the world today, it's unacceptable. I was in India a few months ago. This is my second to last slide. And I went over this bridge and I stopped and looked, and there were families living under the bridge. And many of these families are waste pickers. So what you see in the foreground are all the bales of plastics that they will recycle. And I realized that everything else is what has no value. Everything else are examples of poorly designed packaging, poorly designed plastic products. And that's where the industry, I think, could pay attention to the waste pickers of the world. Treat them more as sanitation engineers who inform us of what recycling really means in these parts of the world. And in the middle, what you see there are like 4 or 5 children who are using plastic trash to make a dam to dam up the untreated human waste that's flowing down that stream. And I thought, okay, this is the ultimate sort of catastrophe of this plastic problem. When you trash the planet, you're also trashing the people. And this, for me, is unacceptable. And I hope you agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus, and for your interesting experiment here on stage. It did work. We talk about solutions, and one part of the solution is making partnerships. And I would say that we have been very successful here at home when preparing for this conference to make partnership that are interested in the topic. And I would like to use the opportunity to thank the various partners, the Nordic Council of Ministers, of course, and especially then the Nordic Marine Group, the Icelandic Marine Research Institute, the Icelandic Recycling Fund, MATIS, that is the Icelandic Food and Biotech Research and Development Center, the Federation of Icelandic Fishing Vessel Owners, Landvernd, the Icelandic Environment Association, FENUR from the waste management sector, SAF, the Icelandic Travel Industry Association, the Federation of Icelandic Industries, and Icelandic Association of Local Authorities, and finally OTIF, for taking their part in making this conference happen. But now we will have our next speaker, Runar Mathiesen. He is head of the Marine Group from the Nordic Council of Ministers. Runar. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, and good morning. It's still morning, I think. We're moving from the big global picture to the more regional one. I'm actually chairman of, for the time being, of the Marine Group in the Nordic Council of Ministers. The Nordic Council of Ministers is an organization for official cooperation between the Nordic government. If you still don't know what it is, it's easy. It's a lot of organizations, and it's good to know what it is. There is a number of groups, different groups, and also a lot of groups who have an interest in this marine litter and marine plastics. For instance, the group dealing with waste management. But I'm part of the Marine Group. We can see here the countries and self-administrative areas that's part of it. From east to west, it's Finland, Åland, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, the Faroe Islands, Iceland, and Greenland. What does this group do? The most important thing is that each year we evaluate project applications, we give funds, and we follow up projects. And in 2014, this year, and also next year, marine litter is one of the hot topics, the most important for us. I will simply use this presentation to tell a little bit about the projects we have this year. As you said, Mr. Chairman, this conference is one project. The other here is 4 other projects we have. I'll quickly run through some of these. Each of these projects should have had their own presentation here, of course, but we'll just touch briefly on them. In fact, the second bullet point here, which should read the importance of wastewater treatment projects. This one will have a presentation later in this conference, so you'll be able to see that in a little bit more detail. And before I move on, I will want to thank the leaders and co-workers of all these projects to send me information and foils about this. So I have had to simplify some of them, but we'll do a little bit of each. And if you have questions later in the conference, there will be people here that know a lot more of each and every of these projects than I do. Okay, we already heard about the Northern Fulmars from Stephanie and Emily. We also have a project on that. The research on this bird and plastics started in around 1980 when Jan van Franeker. The aim of the present study, I even have some later results than you have. from Svalbard up north, which is should be a pristine area. There's not shouldn't be any local sources for plastics there, but of course it's in the ocean current, bringing long-range plastics all the way from Europe and up. But the whole project has the aim of the study is to fill knowledge gaps and also to assess pollution levels in Fulmars, taken from the Faroe Islands, Iceland, and Svalbard. If I'm not much mistaken, this is from Bycatch. I hope that's right. But we're also looking, or this project is also looking on harmful effects resulting from uptake of chemicals and relate the stomach content to chemical loading in primarily liver, breast muscle, and brain tissue. This is the results from Svalbard, which is not been published yet. The reference is at the bottom here. And I think Alice Travail here is somewhere in this audience, so if you have questions, she can answer them. But it's showing that in Svalbard, 87.5% of Fulmars have ingested plastics. And in the average 5.3 pieces per individual. And we have comparative data from the 1980s, and at that time was 29% of the birds had ingested plastics. So it's clearly increasing. Yes, you also saw some of these results earlier. At the top here, we have also in the map, you can see sort of a trend going from Svalbard up north and down to the English Channel, and there's an increase of a percentage of birds who has plastics, more than 1 point. I can't really read up there because I'm a bit too close. But what you see is that the whole of this area has a large number of very high percentage of birds have plastics in them. And if on the second diagram there, you can see the EcoQO, or the indicator from OSPAR. We show that all places is much higher than that. There's also some comparative data from Canada in this one, but it's part of a different current system. Okay. Then I move on to the next one. This is the importance of sewage treatment plants as source to marine microlitter. This is the only slides I got on this. The aim of the project is to investigate waste water treatment plants as a gateway for microlitter to the environment, and to investigate the presence of microlitter in the recipient and gathering knowledge for assessing impacts on recipient biota. The project is running in Finland, Sweden, and Iceland. But also in Norway, we're doing a national project, which is similar to this one. And you will be able, as I told you, to hear more about that in the introductory lecture by Rønn Jørundsdottir under the parallel session on consumer goods. The third project is about marine litter sources in Nordic waters. That's a beach litter project. And it's related to ongoing cleanup activities in Finland, Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. So here is a picture from Sweden on the Clean Europe Day in Sweden on the 10th of May. This is the former Swedish Minister of Environment together with people from the project. Jessica Ångström to the left here is the leader of the project. Yes. There are 4 studies under this project, and here's a summary from the Swedish pilot study on sources. They collected 3 cubic meters of beach litter, and 1,300 pieces were analyzed. They found that 87% was plastic, 75% was single-use products versus multiple use or long-term use. Source activity, 66% was related to consume. Also consuming individual consume. And the use category, 68% was packaging material. Okay. So this will be difficult without reading. That's the fourth project. This is sort of a status project looking at, this was initiated in the summer of 2012. Can you hear me even though I'm away from the, yeah. The objective was to collect and exchange common knowledge and experience with relevance to research, monitoring and assessment of marine litter in Nordic waters as a basis for further action. And activities to establish Nordic network of experts, to describe a common knowledge status on marine litter in Nordic waters. This is to be published in a report to will arrive this autumn. Further, to provide suggestions for methods and approaches that can be used for establishing monitoring activities and prioritization of actions in Nordic waters. To discuss relevant management action and region action plans for marine litter in Nordic waters. The project has organized 2 workshops. The first one was last autumn in Kristineberg outside Gothenburg, where one worked on common knowledge status. And then there is a second workshop to be held in Oslo in November. This is for Nordic government officials who will discuss status and future actions, including monitoring and management actions. So after this second workshop, we'll be able to, all the report will be finalized and issued as a TMA North report. Okay, as I said, there will be one more workshop, but conclusion so far. There's been and are ongoing studies, research and monitoring that demonstrate the occurrence of marine litter everywhere in the Nordic seas, actually. Results of these studies are not always comparative, so there's a need to find out to what extent the monitoring data can produce comparable data sets. These studies provide a basis for initiation of activities on marine litter indicators for monitoring and national management plans in the Nordic countries. Yes, that's it. Basically, I'll give you just a few final remarks. In the Nordic work, we got signals from the Environmental Committee and also from the ministers, actually, that the Nordic Council of Ministers should be in the forefront in the work with marine litter and marine plastics. And that we should contribute positively to ongoing international processes. So that is what we are aiming at. There are a number of processes going on. Of course, in the EU, the follow-up of the Marine Framework Directive is important. And as we heard earlier here, the process of working with the Regional Action Plan on Marine Litter is important. This is happening both in OSPAR and in HELCOM. That means in the North Sea and in the Baltic Sea. So we will contribute to both these processes. Both Sweden and Norway has taken on work as task managers to develop specific actions, and hopefully other Nordic countries will join in as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Runar. Well, we obviously need to look for solutions, and here we have the right man to introduce a little bit of a solution coming from the plastics producers. Mr. Jón Ómar Erlingsson, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone, and thank you for having me. My name is Jón Ómar Erlingsson, and I'm the general manager of Oddi, which is a producer of, among other things, packaging from plastic. First, if I tell you a little bit about myself and the company I represent. We are a producer of packaging and printed material. About 70% of our turnover comes from packaging. 25% of that is from plastic. And just to give you a perspective on the plastic bags, which have been discussed a lot lately, around 3.5% of our turnover comes from the production of grocery bags from plastic. So we are, of course, a stakeholder when it comes to plastic and the use of plastic. But perhaps more importantly, we are very dependent on our natural resources, especially the ocean, since, for example, 1/3 of our turnover comes directly from the fishing industry. And we are, of course, a part of the Icelandic economy, which is heavily dependent on the clean oceans surrounding our country. And not the least, we are an eco-labeled company. We have the Nordic Swan label for our production. We're actually the first packaging company in the world to receive this label. So we take our responsibility very seriously when it comes to the environment. You have perhaps seen this picture before. None of those things belong in the oceans. None of them. Some degrade faster than others. Plastic is among the slowest to degrade in the oceans, but none of them belongs there. Most of the plastic that ends up in the oceans comes from land use, from landfills, or is blown out at sea. And the majority of plastic is used for packaging. And since I also come from a packaging company, I'm going to talk a little bit about packaging. But the implications for other products made of plastics are similar. If you talk about packaging and the use of plastic for packaging to address this serious problem of plastic in the oceans, it's very important that we look at the big picture. It's very easy to jump at fast conclusions and fast actions and ban things and make laws that make something illegal. But if we are truly going to be beneficial to the environment, we need to look at the bigger picture. Packaging in general have a lot of purposes. The most important purpose of packaging is to protect the content. The content is made from natural resources, so in effect packaging are protecting our natural resources and allowing them to reach point to point intact. This is especially true for food, and it has been estimated that a staggering 30% of the food made in the EU is wasted today. This is an enormous amount. Just to put it into context, in the few minutes since I started talking here, we have the population of the world had wasted similar amount of food as the Icelandic nation consumes in 1 year. And when it comes to reducing this waste and protecting the content, and especially food, packaging play a major role. I'm going to show you a short video that highlights this. I think you'll agree with me that we need to look at the big picture when we talk about actions to protect the environment. We need to take the total environmental impact of our actions into account when we take actions. Every product that we make uses some sort of a natural resource, and we need to look at the whole consumption and how it reaches its destination before we take any action. But if we can agree on that packaging is doing some good, are there alternative materials to plastic that we can use? There are. But again, if we take into account the total impact, you can see that the picture isn't so simple. Here we have a study for 3 types of single-use grocery bags. The first one is made of paper, or even 30% recycled paper. Then combustible plastic. There are types of plastic that are combustible, that disintegrate faster in nature. And then in the end, there's the typical grocery bag, the polyethylene grocery bag. This study shows that the environmental impact of producing these 3 types of packaging is very different. Compared to the polyethylene bag, the other 2, the combustible plastic and paper, use from 3 to 20 times more resources in the production. Of course, if you throw them all into the sea, the polyethylene bag is going to last the longest. But we need to look at the whole picture once again. We need to look at the resources that went into making those types of bags. So my conclusion has to be that we really need to put effort into stop plastic from reaching the oceans in the first place. There are alternative materials, but there is today no magic material that has all the good benefits of plastic, but none of the bad. And in any case, our focus should not be to pollute the oceans with better products. We should try to stop polluting the ocean at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jón Ómar. I think it's safe to say there is no simple solution, and one of the issues we are discussing much today is exactly food waste and how we can minimize that as a whole. But up here next is Haukur Þór Hauksson, who is coming from the Federation of Icelandic Fishing Vessel Owners, LIU, and he comes with possible solutions from the fisheries sector's contribution. Thank you. Haukur.
Hi all, thanks for having me. I hope you enjoy your stay in Iceland and eat a lot of good fresh fish in our fine restaurants here in Reykjavik. You will enjoy it hopefully. Well, I jumped in for Kolbeinn, our managing director. We had to leave for Norway for a short notice, but I mean, I'm thinking of going briefly over the main points regarding why is this topic important for us and our members. Then I will go over the current situation and the contribution, what are we doing now, and then going forward, how can we move things forward. I think that we all agree that this issue we're discussing today is something that we in principle all agree on. We don't want to have polluted sea or waste in the marine environment. The Icelandic fishing industry has taken this matter seriously and will continue to do so. But to begin with, why is this important? It's important for the industry because the fishing companies in Iceland, they are basically just producing high quality food and the chain from catching the fish until it's on the plate of the consumer has to be intact, and the chain is only as strong as the weakest link, so to speak. It's the Icelandic fisheries industry policy to treat marine resources with respect, emphasizing sustainability and good value. And our debated quota system, so to speak, although I'm not going to jump into politics here, supports these objectives in a way. It's a long-term thinking that you can do plans and so forth when you catch fish. So if you pollute today, you will face the consequences later on. So the industry is very aware of its dependence on a clean and healthy marine environment. And this is also a sales and marketing concern issue. It's very important to keep the clean and fresh image that Iceland has built up through the years and the decades. We also hear a lot of talks about social responsibility nowadays. We know this debate regarding large retail firms in other sectors, like H&M in clothing and so forth. And I believe that this dialogue will grow in the next few years. The current situation and the contribution. To begin with, the fishing vessel fleet has decreased in numbers, and the fishing gear is of more quality than before. It's not as easily damaged. So that's in a way is a good thing. And also we have better technical equipment, so the time the fishing gear is in the sea or in the waters has also decreased. So in a way that's a possible positive development. And the Federation has an employee who is working on these matters every day, has done so for many years. The actions that has been taken are mainly, I would say, we can go back to around 1980, where there is a sort of change in awareness of this issue. I was just the other day talking to one of our employees, who was a captain for 40 years at sea, and he said, well, when he was starting his career as a captain, it was just a custom that you tied up in the surroundings where you were leaving from, or the company, and he just dumped it in the sea on the way out. This has changed completely. Around 1980, there were posters put in ships just to awake this awareness, like the ocean is not a trash bin, we do not throw trash in the sea, like slogans, and people try to wake awareness there. The Federation has distributed instructions of how fishing gear waste should be categorized and disposed. It's a very raw picture here, just to give you a flavor of that, what type of things we are working on. And there are also instruction of types that you can recycle and the ones you cannot, how you do sort it and what you do with it. There is also, today, every ship above a certain size holds a so-called garbage record book. So that, just to give you an example. So you basically have to log all the trash and waste and deliver it in the right place. And the Federation basically every year annually conducts a report that analyzes what was disposed each year, and this is done according to an agreement with the Icelandic Recycling Fund. And also, to name a few points, if a ship loses its fishing gear, then it's obliged by law to report to the authorities of the coordinates or the GPS points of where the gear was lost, and then there are some examples of to claim that lost gear. but this is not a common problem for the larger vessels nowadays, fortunately. But from 2004, all synthetic fishing gear waste has been systematically collected and recycled abroad or domestically. Also, what do you do with your trash, basically? It's done the way that the waste is collected in containers and then shipped out for recycling. And it's about, the target is about 70 or 80% of all the waste should be recycled. There is a cooperation with a firm in Lithuania, which does a big part of this. The Federation also supports various projects and has done so through the years. Various volunteer organizations cleaning the coastline and etc. And the companies basically that take the waste to recycling, they can do so for free, and some of them get paid actually for different from material to material if there's a value in the waste. And the material that is not applicable for recycling is incinerated or disposed by other means. So far this year, for example, there has been some 29 40 feet containers full of fishing waste gear shipped out for recycling. And on average, it's about 900 to 1,000 tons that are shipped out for recycling in Iceland. And goes to Lithuania, part of it. So, going forward, what can we do? I mean, it's like in every other sector. I mean, people used to throw cigarettes on the street, maybe, and don't do that now. There has to be some economical incentives, not just from sales and marketing terms, but also, I think, if you can get rid of waste in a way for free, you actually get paid. We know that from other sectors. It is much more effective. Increased number of waste collection points. This is something that we target to distribute more. It means that throughout the country it will be simply more or easier to get rid of your waste that you collect, and to be able to ship it out. You need to fill very large containers, and it takes time to fill it, and it's much more easier if you have it nearby, obviously. And also just follow up and increase awareness. I was just the other day talking to people from insurance companies. We have seen a lot of good result regarding accidents. There are much fewer accidents at sea and deaths and so forth. It's a very dangerous job to be at sea. And a part of that is simply because people working at sea are getting more information and are simply more aware of dangers and so forth. So I think the awareness that we do not dump waste into the waters is just vital. It's not all about money, it's just the awareness, and keep reminding people of that. And I think it's a simple fact that clean sea is precious. As I said earlier, the value chain from catching the fish, processing it, sales, marketing, have it on your plate, is always getting faster, and have to do it in a better way. And the starting point there obviously is to have the sea clean. So a lot is being done. We can do better. We'll try to do so. And I hope to learn a lot of information from you guys today. And just want to say thanks.
Thank you, Haukur. It's really inspiring to look at what we have been doing, because it's always important also to look at the bright side and what is done well and lift that forward. And in that note, I would like to take the opportunity to tell you a little bit about Tómas J. Knútsson, who is here in the podium with us, who just recently received the Nature Protection Award given in the name of Sigríður í Brattholti. Tómas is the founder of the Blue Army, which is incidentally the only army in Iceland, and it's a very peaceful one. He has led pioneering work since 1995 in cleaning waste from beaches and ports of Iceland. All in all, he and his army has collected and shipped to a proper waste handling facility over 1,200 tons of waste. This reminds us, like I mentioned before, that every good idea starts with one individual. So here is it for Tómas and his peaceful army for the nature. But we are now almost halfway through the conference, and I hope that you are all as inspired as I am. We have covered a lot of ground on what is the problem, what is the size of the problem, and what is being done globally in Europe and in Nordic countries. So if we just summarize this shortly, Hildur gave us an inspiring talk about what you can do as an individual. And I think that this is something that we can all take with us home. We all have to do and take our responsibility. Then Stephanie came with a message from the Berlin conference and went over sort of the emerging issues, also what is done in the literature now. And it is amazing to see that only about 60% of the plastic produced is going into energy recovery or recycling, but 40% is lost. So there is, of course, something that we have to think about. Then we went over with Emily to the OSPAR Convention that went over the regional action plan. And I think it's really important for us as a fishing nation, as a nation of having large seas, to cooperate with other countries, because this is a problem that you cannot tackle alone. And OSPAR is one of the international cooperation tools that we have to use. And then Marcus gave us an inspiring talk and went through his journey throughout the world, what happens for plastic, both as a scientist, but also as awareness raiser. But I think that is also important when these two parts coexist. He went over the amount of the problem, what is really the problem, the origin, and, for example, what is the solution. And one of the issues he raised is smarter products. Then Runar went over what we are doing in the Nordic scene. We have lots of projects ongoing now, and it's really clear that the Nordic Council of Ministers sees this plastic in the ocean as an emerging issue that we have to be really good at addressing. But also that this is not something that we will find a solution on our own. Then Jón Ómar came with some message from the plastic industry, and we can say that it is not such a simple problem that you can take plastic out and the solution is there. It's not like that. The time for easy solution has passed. This is not an end-of-pipe solution, and we need to think about it in a more larger scale. One of the issues I always think about is, of course, handling of the waste. It's not the plastic that you get, but it's also how you handle it at home, in the companies, and in the waste sites. And we got a message from Haukur Þór for the Federation of Icelandic Fishery Vessels, the need for long-term thinking, the dependence of us as a fishing nation on a clean marine environment, and therefore this is of utter importance for us. He told us about a better quality in fishing gear and a less time that the fishing gear is in the sea, and also about what the fishing industry has been doing over the years since around, 1980s. We all remember when we sort of like start taking out this concept that the Marines sort of could take all the debris from us, and it's just around 1980, so it's not such a long time ago. So if you think about that, we can also make a big headway in the next 10 years. And also looking at ways forward, economical incentives, and therefore it's always interesting to think about plastic not as waste, but as a valuable product. If you think about it as a valuable product, then it's much less likely to being lost at sea. And in the end, now we've got this great documentary from the Nordic Marine Group, Nordic Waste Group, and the Working Group for Fisheries for the Baltic Sea Expedition. But I hope that you all have a lot of ideas now, and to ensure that you can be part of the solution. This is not an easy conference, then you can just listen and then go home. Now, after the lunch, it's time for you to be responsible and figure out what kind of solution we can get forward for the future. And just to remind us once again, there will be no one solution that will fix this problem. We will have to put emphasis on personal behavior and getting people involved. And that's why I'm also very happy to see all of you here. Thank you, and have a nice lunch. It serves just out here. Thank you.